question.
Yeah, chapter 9.
You have a tendency to backtrack on me as soon as I think that, so.
Is that a dare? I'm sure I can come up with something else to talk about on chapter 8. All right, Genesis chapter 9 this evening. And I will say this, as we get deeper into Genesis, we will speed up some. These first few chapters are the ones that really tend to go slow. Once we get probably past chapter 11, they'll go much quicker. We'll cover more territory. All right, chapter 9. And I'm going to attempt this evening to get down through verse 17. It says, And God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Notice that every time something major has happened, God continues to reiterate this one command. One of the first things that God told Adam and Eve was to be fruitful and multiply. After the fall, just to confirm for them that that command had not changed, he told them again. And then we have this here, and by the way, in verse 7, he says it again, As for you, be fruitful and multiply, populate the earth abundantly and multiply in it. So, how do we look at that when God has told us to fill the earth? How does that square with the concept of overpopulation?
Well, it kind of goes against that.
Yes, it does. Because we're a long way to, even though there are some nations that are certainly crowded, we're a long ways from overpopulating the earth at this point. All right, verse 2 says, And the fear of you and the terror of you shall be on every beast of the earth, and on every bird of the sky, with everything that creeps on the ground, and all the fish of the sea, into your hand they are given. Now, this is a major change in humanity's relationship with the animal kingdom. Up until this point, animals had no inherent fear of humanity. But beginning with the time that they're getting off the ark and a new covenant is established by God, and as we'll see, it's not just a covenant with Noah, but a covenant with all of the animal and human life, that God changes this. Now, why do you suppose at this point God would cause animals now to fear humanity?
They're going to start eating them.
That's a good possibility when you figure there's only 8 people alive on the earth, and you have animals that are, as far as we can tell, there were already animals that, were predatory because, again, of the fall of humanity, which had ramifications within the animal kingdom. There's a good possibility they could return and predate on people.
No, I actually meant that the other way around. The people are going to start eating the animals.
Well, that's true.
That's why the animals need to have a fear of people, so
But-
they can survive.
But have you considered the possibility that it may be the animals predating on people?
Could be, but I think the very next verse kind of clarifies my position.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm not disagreeing with you. I have a feeling it goes both ways. But we need to keep in mind that animals like, big cats, wolves, things of that sort, if they are predatory by this point and have no fear of humanity, well, even today, if you raise a naturally predatory animal in captivity and it loses its fear of people, it may develop a relationship with the people that have raised it, but what about anybody else? They tend to look at anybody else as food. that predatory animal running around here. She sees every last one of us as a source of food.
Yeah, she does.
God must have transitioned all this fairly slowly, because there had to be time for some of these animals to start to repopulate, the ones that would be predated upon.
Oh yeah.
So they didn't get wiped out.
I have a feeling that probably
And the
did
predators
happen.
had to have a way to get nutrition without eating other animals.
Mm-hmm.
So there had to be some kind of a transitional period
Well,
where God transitioned what the animals that had been eating plants to start eating meat.
mm-hmm. I don't doubt that, and we do see evidence of that even today. I mean, you're a cat fan here. I know that's a shock to everybody that Meryl likes cats. But how many times have you seen cats that are naturally meat eaters that from time to time will eat, scraps or whatever else you give them? There's still.
Bitty loves to eat muffins.
Oh yeah. Connie and I had a cat here a while back that liked peanut butter.
Oh yeah, I have several cats that like peanut butter.
So even predatory animals will eat, vegetables and greens from time to time. So we still see that tendency within there.
They eat other animals.
What's that?
They eat other animals.
Oh yeah, they'll eat other. But that's exactly what Meryl was talking about. There is probably was some period of time that they may have had some period of adjustment where God put it within them to eat something else for a while. But also consider some of the predatory animals. Notice that God has naturally ordained, nature, and I hate to use that term because so many people could equate nature with evolution, like Mother Nature. By the way, I don't know if any of you use that term. I despise the term Mother Nature.
I don't use it.
There is no such thing as Mother Nature.
No.
There's a Father God.
You don't believe in Gaia?
I know. But anyway, where I was going with that is consider a lot of predatory not predatory animals, the animals that are prey animals, rabbits, mice, rodents and what have you. Look how fast they tend to reproduce. And if there wasn't something predating on them, we would be overrun with, rodents and things of that sort. Actually,
Sometimes we still are.
Yeah, they have a problem with that in Australia. That somebody here about 100 years ago introduced rabbits, I think, into Australia. I forgot what they did it for, but it was outside the normal Australian, ecosystem, and the rabbits got out of hand.
That's because they killed off the dingoes.
Yeah,
If the dingoes had still been around, they would have been eating the rabbits.
probably so.
The Everglades.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, anyway. But it says at this point, God has put the fear of humanity on animals, and the fact that he tells them this tells us that apparently before the flood, they weren't afraid of people. Every moving thing that is alive shall be food for you. This is the second thing in verse 3. It says, every moving thing that is alive shall be food for you. I give all to you as I gave the green plant. So, before the flood, this verse right here tells us that God actually, I realize that for us meat eaters in here, this is like, oh, don't want to think about that. I like barbecue. I like animals.
We get our vegetables through the cow.
Yeah, well, I just just for folks like you, Larry, I would remind you that I do really, I like animals, especially with a little,
Medium
little salt and pepper and barbecue.
Yeah.
But what this verse tells us is that up until this point, humanity was vegetarian, and those animals that were sacrificed were provided two things. They provided clothing, because the first animal sacrifice that was made, what did they produce? Clothing for Adam and Eve, absolutely. So you have wool, leather, clothing of that sort. And the second thing, and probably even more important thing, is the so-called clean animals were for sacrifice. because God made it clear all the way back in the argument between Cain and Abel that while I'm sure God appreciates the offerings of the first fruits of the ground, and we know that he does, even though he didn't accept Cain's offering, but I think that was because Cain basically was had the wrong attitude about it. And I'm not saying that if all Cain offered had been the fruit of the ground, that would have been acceptable. What I am saying is that God, I believe, would have accepted his offering. Notice I didn't use the word sacrifice. Would have accepted his offering had it been offered correctly. The reason we know that because in the law of Moses, what is one of the first the things that God requires? First fruits of the ground. But that is not enough. That is just putting God first in our economy. God still required a blood sacrifice, and that's what Cain did not do. So Cain had, people ask, well, was it the sacrifice? Was it his attitude? Both were true. Cain had a bad attitude and of what he did provide, but then he failed to provide a blood sacrifice. Because what's the whole point of the blood sacrifice?
Atone for sin.
Yeah, the covering of sin. Because it all set the stage for the sacrifice of the Messiah. But here, at this point, God has now added this and said, from now on, all of these animals no longer are we just sacrifice and clothing or wool and what have you, but now they're also food. However, notice that there's one thing missing here. Has anybody caught the specifics of what God has told them with regard to these animals being food?
Don't eat the blood.
Well, that's
Not
true.
that
We haven't gotten that far yet. But the fact that God did not say only clean animals, he said all of them are available. God did not prohibit unclean animals for food until he gave the law of Moses, which is still several hundred years yet to the future. At this point, God said all the animals are acceptable for food, and then that prohibition as long as you don't drink the blood, which we'll get to at this point. Verse 4 says, only you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. And once again, all of this is a precursor or setting the model. By the way, theologians refer to this as typology, with the word type, T-Y-P-E. Theologians call this typology, which basically is a fancy word for saying God is making a model of the Messiah. Because what would the Messiah give? Instead of an animal sacrifice, he would sacrifice himself, and in giving up his life, what did he give up?
Blood.
His blood. Which I believe is exactly the reason why in the resurrection says nothing about a body of flesh and blood. Verse 5, and surely I will require your lifeblood. From every beast I will require it, and from every man. From every man's brother I will require the life of man. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. For in the image of God he made man, and as for you, be fruitful and multiply, populate the earth abundantly, and multiply in it. Notice there's a couple of things change here. For example, when Cain murdered Abel, did God require Cain's life for it?
No.
It was certainly a crime worthy of the death penalty, but before the flood, God did not require them to execute someone guilty of murder. Why do you suppose that changed? Why after the flood? Two things have changed.
Covenant changed and he had reset everything.
You're on the right track with the idea of covenant, but let me come back to that. because first I'm going to state the obvious one. Now, when Cain murdered Abel, if God had executed Cain, that would have eliminated a significant bloodline and what was missing in the earth at that point.
Lots of people.
Lots of people. God wanted them to be fruitful, multiply. That's one of the reasons why he reiterates his command so often. Now he's saying, you know, I'm going to require your life if you murder somebody. And by the way, the whole issue of, you know, when you hear modern criminologists talking about, well, the death penalty is a deterrent. Notice there is absolutely no hint anywhere in the Bible of the concept of deterrence. Why does God state that if you murder somebody, your life will be required? Has nothing to do with deterrence.
Justice.
It is flat out justice. It's punishment. It's the lawyers have a fancy word for this. It's called lex talionis. And that basically is a fancy Latin phrase for an eye for an eye. The law of retribution is literally what that means. And we see that in the law of Moses when it says, you know, an eye for an eye. So, and it really has nothing to do with deterrence. It's just plain punishment. You kill somebody, I kill. Now, how many of you, anybody in here fans of what they used to call themselves, the, it's Jeff Foxworthy and about 3 other.
Blue collar.
Yeah, the Blue Collar
Tour.
Comedy Tour. There's one of them, I think his guy was Ron White. Ron White's always talking about Texas. And I remember seeing Ron White in one of his little comedy skits talking about the death penalty in Texas. He said, don't kill anybody in Texas, we will kill you back. What's that?
Yeah, never mind.
You probably saw that one, huh?
Yeah.
So, but the bottom line is, you know, a lot of people today, including many Christians, that say, oh, it's ungodly, you know, to require the death penalty. Well, they didn't get that from the Bible. And of those that say, well, that's the law of Moses, that it doesn't apply now. Chapter 9 of Genesis got nothing to do with Moses. Moses wasn't even born yet. God is making it very clear that at this point the death penalty is required because he's trying to put a stop to what, you know, go back to the Garden of Eden, or should say right just outside the Garden of Eden. When Cain killed Abel, murder started right off at the beginning. And not to say that God didn't know about this to begin with, but again, he's already told us in the previous chapter that God knows that our hearts are what from the beginning?
Evil.
We're evil. And the flood did not change that. So God has put down, and here's where it comes to what Connie said as far as a new covenant. God is establishing a new covenant. And right off the bat, he is saying here, don't kill anybody. Because God wants the human population to get reestablished. And so he's putting down a penalty. Don't kill anybody, because if you do, as they say in Texas, we will kill you back.
All right, you've been focusing on verse 6, and I want to go back to verse 5.
All right, go ahead.
I'm trying to get my head around what verse 5 means. Is that basically God's telling everybody that every human and every animal are going to die? This is his way of saying that the penalty of death that I've imposed on you is permanent? I'm not lifting it?
No, and actually, it's not verse 6 that I've been focusing on. I'm still on verse 5.
Oh, okay.
This is talking about the death penalty. What he's also saying with regard to animal life, that if an animal kills somebody, we are ordered to hunt it down and execute the animal. For example, we all know that what happens, let's say if a tiger gets hungry enough and in its old age is no longer able to hunt its natural prey and kills people, what do we tend to do to it?
Hunt
Put
it
it
down.
down.
We hunt it down. Why?
We'll keep doing it.
Because it gets a taste for human flesh and realizes people are easy to kill.
Comes the road.
And tasty too.
What's that?
And tasty
And
too.
tasty.
I had a uncle who was a missionary in Kenya years ago, and one of the things that he did was hunt down, killing, the cats.
Mm-hmm.
And then he'd go out from time to time, and he'd shoot an elephant or something for the villagers to come and eat. They'd have that elephant stripped down in just a few hours. But it was
That's a lot of
interesting.
meat.
Huh?
I said that's a lot of meat.
Yeah, well, it was for the whole village. But it was interesting, some of the stories he had about the big cats. You're right, they get the taste for humans, and humans are easy prey, and a lot of these cats don't have any teeth anymore and stuff, so they're dangerous.
Yep. And so what this is God has established a death penalty not only for people who kill people, but animals who kill people. And we do that here in Florida. What happens when we find a gator that kills somebody?
Goes bye-bye.
Yeah, they will go out of their way to hunt and find that particular gator and kill it, because they know once a gator's killed a person once, it will do it again. And so God is establishing the concept of the death penalty here as a penalty, not as a deterrent, but as a penalty for it. But the second reason, which Connie mentioned earlier, is God is establishing a new covenant here. And here's what we call the Noahic Covenant. Notice who it is that said, now we're on to verse 6, by the way. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. Who's responsible for maintaining order?
We are.
We are now. What changed between before the flood and after the flood is we have several examples before the flood where, even though because of Adam and Eve's sin, we had been cut off from fellowship with God, God did still from time to time interact with humanity. And we know that, for example, who taught Adam and Eve how to make skins? And, who taught them how to cure leather? God did it. And when Cain killed Abel, who confronted Cain? God did. So what you have before the flood is what semblance of government they had. God was the head of that government. But now, God has withdrawn from this, and now God is establishing something new, and we call it human government. God is saying, from this point forward, you are going to be required to maintain order in your own society. And again, this is what theologians refer to as the Noahic Covenant, is that through Noah, God has now established the concept of human government. We have to maintain our own order and discipline. Notice God did not give any specifics as to how we were to do it. He's just saying, whoever murders somebody, humanity is responsible for dealing with it. How we deal with it, God has left up to us, but He did give us that responsibility. Bonnie, did you have?
No, I just,
Oh, okay. I was looking around and I saw some movement.
sorry.
Sort of like being at an auction.
Yeah.
Never scratch an itch at an auction.
I don't want to buy anything.
If you twitch at an auction, you just bid on it. All right. Okay, verse 7, again, that's self-explanatory. This is the second time here in this chapter that God's reiterated this. Get busy populating the earth again. Verse 8, then God spoke to Noah and to his sons with him. Once again, something different here. Notice God did not just address Noah. He's talking to Noah and his sons, saying, now behold, I myself do establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you. Now, God has not yet, at this point, made it clear what this covenant is, although we can assume part of this covenant is the issue of giving us responsibility for human government. But there's another covenant that goes along with this. Verse 10 says, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the cattle, and every beast of the earth with you, of all that comes out of the ark, even every beast of the earth. Now, notice this was in the present, not the past tense. Said everything that comes out of the ark, not that came out of the ark. So what does this tell us? That when God told them that, it was apparently before they had opened the door to let the animals out. It said, verse 11, and I establish my covenant with you, and all flesh shall never again be cut off by the water of the flood, neither shall there again be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, this is the sign of the covenant which I am making between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all successive generations. Notice that God, in this particular thing, most covenants in the Bible are two-sided. If you do this, I'll do this. For example, the covenant he made with Israel was a two-sided covenant. God said, I'll bless you, but what was Israel's responsibility? They had to be obedient. They had to follow him. If you don't follow me, well, then I'm going to have to punish you. Notice this is it's an unconditional covenant. God required nothing of them. He just said, I'm making this covenant. In other words, I'm promising you right now. Nothing is required of you, but I'm promising you this. And the second part of this is, notice this covenant is not just with humanity. This is a covenant he even made with all of animal life.
Except the fishes and the insects.
True, he didn't mention them.
They weren't on the ark.
Right. Said, everything that was on that ark with you, I'm covenanting with you right now. I will never again destroy the earth and all life with a flood. Now, verse 13, by the way, let's see. I think we can make it through, if you can give me about another 3 or 4 minutes, we'll make it down through verse 17, which is a good stopping spot. Verse 13, I set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Again, not just the animals and people, but even the earth itself is part of this covenant. And it shall come about when I bring a cloud over the earth, that the bow shall be seen in the cloud, and I will remember my covenant, which is between me, and you, and every living creature of all flesh, and never again shall the water become a flood to destroy all flesh. Notice God did not promise that he would never send a flood. He said he would never send a flood that would destroy everything. I mean, we've had plenty of floods in the world, thousands of floods have occurred, but none that were worldwide or that caused massive, loss of life. God said he'd never do that again. And his sign of that is, of course, what's a bow in the cloud? Rainbow. Which, of course, I'm sure we're all in agreement here that this is one of the reasons why it just annoys me to no end that the homosexual, the homosexuals in our culture have usurped a sign that they have no right to lay claim to. That's God's sign of a covenant.
I heard too that before the flood that someone mentioned that the remnant, when you had the atmosphere wasn't supported the rainbow prior to the flood.
All right, elaborate.
Well, because the firmament wouldn't allow the rainbow to create, it takes a clear sky and moisture in the sky in a way that it's a premise.
Well,
it's he didn't think that the firmament would have been able to support a rainbow. So,
I don't know. If light refracted through moisture that was below in the atmosphere, because the laws of physics didn't change. I mean, if light refracts through water, it's going to bend. But that is one of the big questions of theology that I've read multiple accounts of, that some that claim that these people didn't know what a rainbow was at this point. And then others that say, well, the rainbow was no big deal, that God simply took something that they were already familiar with and said that from now on, that when you see this, this is just a reminder, because unless God miraculously changed the law of physics, water would have refracted through, light would have refracted through water before or after the flood.
Oh, it's just that the atmosphere was so consistent that either it had rainbows all the time, or you didn't have any, because everything was constant.
Yeah.
And that's what
It was
makes
cloudy everywhere.
everywhere, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, you don't have a difference where you could actually see it.
And that, and that may be a possibility. But clearly they knew what that bow was.
The whole sky might have glowed with different colors at that point.
And that's a possibility as well. God may have said, by the way, look up, you see this? He said, that's my sign for you right there. All right, let's see. Verse 15, I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and never again shall the water become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the cloud, then I will look upon it to remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. Notice he refers to this as an everlasting covenant. He doesn't say this is anything temporary. God's basically saying this covenant will last forever. And does make sense, because even after this earth is long gone, is God going to destroy even the next earth with a flood? Clearly not. So God, is basically saying this covenant is permanent. Verse 17, and God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant which I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. There's several different times in the context of this that God has said, this isn't just between me and you or me and humanity. This is a promise that I'm making every living thing. And by the way, in that context, he did, in a sense, even include the fish and everything else, because he said all flesh.
Yeah, I got that.
You caught that?
Yeah, hopefully.
All right. We'll leave off at verse 17 there, pick up at verse 18.